Welcome to Biblioccultist, where I review books that I find interesting in the topics of religion, philosophy, fiction, and history. In this episode, I'll do something a little different because I think this is such an important book, historically speaking and culturally speaking, even if it is not well known in the English-speaking world. So I'm going to go through Life is a Dream by Pedro Calderón de la Barca, which is a very famous Spanish playwright. But before I begin, please remember to subscribe to the channel. If you're new here, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, and comment on the video. Subscribing, liking the videos, etc. really helps the channel out to grow. I know a lot of people just watch videos and don't subscribe, but subscribing really helps the channel out. So if you can do that, I will greatly appreciate it. So because this book is a book written in Spanish during the Spanish Golden Age, it is written in a classic Spanish language, and the edition that I have is in the original Spanish, but I will recommend and I will speak on the book as if I was presenting an English translation, because like I said before, to me, the edition is not as important as the content. So if we have a French book, if we have a Russian book, if we have a Spanish book, English book, it doesn't matter. You can usually find a good translation, and I looked online and I did see a lot of good translations of this particular book. So although the edition I'm presenting today is a Spanish edition in the original language of the work, you should be able to find a good translation and enjoy it as well. The edition that I have is one that I've had since I was a child, and this edition in particular, I read it when I was in high school. So I want to present this work in the edition that I have. Obviously, get an edition that you can read in the language you can read. So this edition that I have here of Life is a Dream is from 1981 by Editorial Planeta, which is the name of the editorial house. Now, like I said, I've had this book for many, many years. Unfortunately, I've lost a lot of books. You know, every time a person moves, we lose books. At least that's my case. Every time I've moved, and I used to move a lot, every time I got to my new apartment or my new house, and I'll go through the boxes, I realized that an entire box was missing or something. So unfortunate, but this one has survived all those moves and all these years, and it has gotten to me intact. And I remember this book when I was younger, and it was already a used book. So, but it has survived, and it doesn't look that bad. So this edition in particular is very good because although it's a pocket softcover, what's cool about it is that it has the play, but it also has something else called the Sacramental, and I'll explain that in a second. For those who don't know, Pedro Calderón is a 17th century playwright during the Spanish Golden Age, and very, very famous in the Spanish-speaking world, and I believe he should be as well, just like Shakespeare is famous and known in the Spanish-speaking world. I believe that Calderón should be very well known, just like his influence, Lope de Vega, which is a very famous playwright, Spanish playwright. He should also be very well known in the rest of the English-speaking world. He is in Europe, so he is read by the Germans, he's read by the French, he's read by the Italians, he's known. But I don't think a lot of Americans, for example, are familiar with him. So that's why I'm doing this video, to kind of present him as best as I can. Now, he was not influenced by Shakespeare. They are contemporaries, but the underpinnings of both cultures were very different. It was not a globalized world at the time. So the cultural movements of each country were in their own path. They still are these days, but a lot more interaction is present today than it was before. Now, I will first go through the play and then go through the alto. The alto sacramentals were popular plays. So you had the main play that was done in a theater, usually more of an upper caste, accessible kind of work. And then you would have a festival-centered play that would feed off the main play, but it was meant to primarily teach dogmatics, religion, theology to the masses. It was done in the main plaza where the public usually would celebrate things like Corpus Christi and things like this. And I find those works to be even more sophisticated in a very interesting fashion. In other words, you have the elite work, it's more kind of populist kind of work. But then when you go to the autos, which are supposed to be for the masses, they're actually very sophisticated works and highly magical works. And I mean magical by alchemical and philosophical work. So this play deals with the ephemeral nature of life. And I will do my best not to give spoilers on this work because I think people should enjoy the work without spoilers, but I have to give you some idea of what we're talking about. So how life itself is shifting and dreamlike. In other words, are we awake? Are we asleep? And how we contend with our self-perception in the world. In other words, when we present ourselves to the world, are we aware of our worth or do we invent our worth? So it contends with this conception of self-deceit. But it plays with the idea of self-deceit in a way that you even consider whether or not what seems to be realism is actually a deceit and vice versa. And you'll see there's a main character, Segismundo, and this character goes through a process in which he has an experience in which he doesn't really know if he's awake or asleep. And there's a very Greek aspect to this because the pivoting point of the story has an astrological component that reminds me of Vedic literature and Greek tragedies. And obviously I can tell that Calderón is using this as a basis for the story. He's taking a trope, if you will, of his time, because playwrights all know Greek tragedies. He's using that to introduce a different conception and a philosophical conception and a theological conception into the work. So the astrological point is very present, and it's assumed that it is not only understood, but it is also assumed that it is accepted, which is very interesting because a lot of people would assume that astrology is considered to be something deeply heretical or evil. But the fact is that Spanish Golden Age Catholics were very open to astrology, and it was discussed and utilized for a lot of things. And in this story, an astrological prediction is used to justify the behavior of the king towards his son. So very, very fascinating. It considers the idea that each state that we are present in, every aspect of our existence, which is dominated by God's mercy or God's love or God's will, is going through an exchange with our will and our perception so that we are not very clear where we stand when it comes to other human beings and our behavior. So there is a very important reflection in this play when it comes to the nature of fate, the nature of free will, and things like honor and respect and being level-headed. Now, the cool thing about the author is that he is very self-aware. So a lot of his puns, a lot of his jokes, a lot of his ironic statements, and some of the exaggerations in the play are transparent to a point in which, in some cases, Calderón will have the actors direct themselves in a way that is pretty clear they know they're in a play. And those who are watching the play also feel that at some points there's a break between the fiction and reality, which I think it's on purpose to make the point of the play itself, which is that life is a dream, or at least it's perceived as a dream. And again, I found that particular theological position to be fascinating, since the traditional Christian viewpoint does not support this view that our experiences in life itself is Maya, it's illusion. Christianity and I would say all Abrahamic religions tend to be very grounded when it comes to the notions of reality versus illusion. And it would be more like Gnosticism to say that everything is false or is illusory and that we're in a dream state from which we have to awake. Those conceptions are a lot closer to Eastern thought than to Western thought. Now, I'm not saying that Calderón is in any way a Buddhist of some kind or a Hindu of some kind. I'm simply stating that it is pretty clear that he is experimenting with a few notions and Christianizing those notions. And I think he does a good job. At the time, a lot of works were deeply censored or banned if they strayed too far from the teachings of the church. And in this case, this work was popular during his lifetime. So it's very cool to see that, at least in the way that this was presented, was not sufficient to get the story banned. Now, when it comes to the Sacramental Auto, which is that second play that was included in this edition, and hopefully the editions you can find in English will have this portion, but just try to see if you can find it that way. This part to me is the most fascinating. Now, the play itself, in my opinion, Life is a Dream, is a better work as a play than the Auto Sacramental as a play. Nonetheless, more interesting because of the contents. Again, astrology plays a big part of it, but there's an alchemical conception presented in this work as a supplement, as a different perspective of the main work that I really haven't seen in other authors. Even in modern times, I've never seen this. And when I was younger, and I read this when I was around 16 years old, I didn't catch any of this, to be very honest, because I didn't really understand how these two works related at all. And even the content of the work, I caught glimpses of the meaning of the work. I don't think I was mature enough to really imbibe this knowledge, but I did catch something. But here, as I get older, now I can value and understand how this work is related to the other in a very deep way. The way the Trinity is presented is alchemical, and it feeds into what eventually become occultism. So this has an occultic element before occultism existed. And like I've said before, occultism had a deeply Christian undertone. It always had until recently. So when I see occultism, that's what I'm referring to. This work puts the Trinity into conceptions. God the Father is power, the Son is wisdom, and the Holy Spirit is love. Again, he didn't invent this, but this concept has that very particular Christian dialectic that developed in the medieval period and was experimented on the medieval period. And you see it here flower in Spain during this era, and positioning these three personalities as concepts, which theologically speaking, especially for traditional Christian dogmatics, it was considered to be a very bad idea to take actual persons of the Trinity and turn them into conceptions, because that was a way of removing the actual personality of the members of the Trinity and turning them into ideas. Very philosophical, a very philosophical move that was considered to be problematic. Now, in this part of the work, it also has the elements, fire, water, earth, air, vying for dominance and are only subjected when they are presented by the Trinity, because they recognize the Trinity as God. But this conception of elements influencing existence of reality being controlled by the hand of power, wisdom, and love, so that creation can come about, is a very alchemical notion. And again, it also has the as below, so below conceptions, microcosm, macrocosm, which is also a component of free will. So obviously free will is a big deal in this component of the play, because free will is separated as its own category. So you have power, wisdom, love, the four elements, and then you have free will. And free will is a particular element that is exchanging with wisdom. So wisdom and free will, they're interacting, and decision making is being done based on this interaction, which again, very, very magical thinking in the work. And then you have Lucifer and the shadow. They're separated as conceptions again, and how they influence man out of envy, fear, and confusion, and ignorance, because the shadow is presented that way with Lucifer. And the character of Lucifer in the work is absolutely fascinating because he's not presented in a kind of classic cliche way as a, demon full of hate whose entire purpose in life is to murder and destroy, etc. But is presented as a rational being, a being of light whose purpose is to comprehend why would power, wisdom, and love create a man and give him free will. And one of the discussions that I found very poignant is, and I'm going to mention it because it did go over my head when I read it, but is this notion that if God thought of man but then didn't create him, the question arises whether he would be punishing man by not creating him. In this theological question, which is a very complex question in theological circles in the Catholic milieu, is very powerful, and it was given to the masses, which is interesting. I mean, all this alchemical occult work is being thrown out there for the masses. Just that historically is very significant, because I would say even today you wouldn't be able to do such a thing. People wouldn't know what you're talking about. So it tells you a lot about the ignorant peasants, supposedly, that were living in the so-called kind of backwards European Spanish villages, that they were sophisticated enough to go to a play like this in public and appreciate and enjoy a work this sophisticated. And that question is a very complex theological question. It has to do with the mind of God, the concept of whether or not God as a creator needs to constantly create, or if it was a choice, a free choice by God as creator to create man or not. It has to do with divine conceptualism. So there's a lot of very cool, very interesting stuff in there that is being presented to the masses. And finally, one of the ideas that I didn't catch when I read it, like I said, I didn't know how these two works connected, but the most significant thing in this work, and I caught it when I read it a second time decades later, is that the connection between the two stories has to do with Adam, because Adam is now confused between a dream state and awakened state. His fall from grace is presented as the falling into a dream. And this is identical to works like the Bhagavata Purana, for example, which contends that the soul has fallen, or at least has entered, because that's a debatable issue, into the material world out of some kind of sinful or disturbed consciousness. And by falling into the material world, he's falling into Maya, into illusion. And now he doesn't know whether he's dreaming or whether he's awakened. And this work actually connects Adam to the main character in the other play, Segismundo, and whether or not he is conscious of his awakened or dreamlike state. And also the consideration of whether or not you are aware that you are the king or the son of nature, that you were created through Adam to be the sons of God and to be the kings of nature. So it is an immediate, clear connection between the main play and the secondary play. And the way it is done, it's absolutely masterful. And this is why this is a must read for every educated person, irrespective of the language you speak, German, Japanese, Chinese, doesn't matter. This is a universally important work, irrespective of your culture. So I wanted to share this because I think it is worth your time and worth your attention. So Hopefully you enjoyed the review. Please remember to subscribe to the channel. Like I said before, it really does help. Click the like, click the bell for notifications, share the video, comment on the video. I'll be more than happy to respond if I see a discussion. So thank you for joining me. See you next time.